all set?
I am all set. I think that sounds great. Welcome,
Terrific.
everyone. We are so glad you are joining us today. If this is your first time on Zoom, definitely take note of a couple features. We would ask that all participants keep themselves muted during this webinar just to cut down on background noise. And there is an option to switch to a phone audio if you'd prefer to listen through that way. We are also offering closed captions as part of this webinar. To view the live captions, you can follow this link and note that this will open in a separate window. So you may have to adjust your windows so that you can see the webinar materials and also the closed captioning. And if you would like to keep your video on, you are certainly welcome to do that. You're also welcome to turn off your video if you would prefer. And we will be taking questions throughout the webinar using the chat feature. So if you have already opened up your chat window, you are in good shape. You'll see some instructions there as well as a copy to the closed captioning link in the chat box. And so if you would like to type in your questions in the chat box, I'll be responding to them throughout the webinar and responding to some of the questions that came in advance. So thank you to those of you who provided those. If you signed up for Coping with COVID Strategies for Mid-Atlantic Artists, you are in the right spot. Thank you so much for being with us today. A quick note, this webinar is being recorded. We will share a video of the recording with you via email afterwards, and we'll also share a copy of the slides in PDF form with you afterwards. We will be going through some of the material kind of quickly, so rest assured you will have access to these materials afterwards as you go through and percolate this information. Right now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Teresa Colvin, although I suspect many of you know her well. Teresa, would you like to share a few words?
Sure. Thanks so much, Elaine. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Teresa Colvin. I'm the Executive Director of the Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation, and I just want to welcome you on behalf of the Foundation to this webinar today. I know that this is a time of tremendous uncertainty, and I'm hopeful, of course, that you can take away something from today's webinar that will prove useful to you as we continue to move through this very challenging time. At Mid-Atlantic Arts, we are trying, of course, like most, to be as flexible with our programs, with our grantees and applicants, while providing information on resources and opportunities to the field as a whole. You could visit our COVID-19 resource page at Mid-Atlantic Arts, www.midatlanticarts.org, for funding support specific to individual artists across all disciplines. And as new opportunities become available, we continue to add them to this page, share through social media, so we encourage you to check in often. I really want to, again, thank all of you as artists. We know that we continue to be inspired by all of you to persevere through this very challenging time. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Elaine, who will lead today's webinar for you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Teresa. I appreciate that. As Teresa mentioned, my name is Elaine. I am a CPA and I have a personal financial specialist designation, and I am an accredited financial counselor. So what I say when I'm working with organizations and individuals or in a teaching capacity is that we can talk about taxes and budgeting and financial planning, and I can hand you tissues while we cry together a little bit around all of those things. Because talking about those things in the arts is really, really hard and they feel really personal. My work is with organizations all across the country that support those in the creative sector, and it is a huge pleasure to be doing this work. Although I am a CPA, this information is for educational purposes only. We want to make sure you're clear on that, and also that you understand that the information, especially when it comes to unemployment, varies from state to state. So you'll definitely want to follow up with your own state's unemployment office for specific answers to your questions. And also know that this information is changing in real time. So we've brought you information today that is as up to date as we hoped it could be, but also do know that these things are changing pretty regularly because this is a time of uncertainty for all of us. So what we plan to do today is talk about unemployment assistance, specifically the programs that have expanded to include self-employed individuals like those in the arts community. We'll also touch on some emergency assistance opportunities, specifically those stimulus checks that many of you may have started to receive, but also the PPP program. We know the program ran out of money last week, but there's some activity in looking at reapportioning dollars for that program. So we'll talk a little bit about that and things you can do. And then we'll talk about some very practical next steps, things you can be thinking about as you plan for the rest of your year and beyond, knowing that there's still a lot of uncertainty. As I mentioned, you can put your questions into the chat if you have them as we go through this webinar, because we want to make sure we are definitely addressing all of the questions you have. We know it's a really trying time for many individuals. And as I mentioned at the beginning, but I want to reiterate, this is being recorded, so you'll have a copy of the recording later, and you'll also receive a copy of the slides and the materials. So with that, let's go ahead and get started, and I will tell you a little bit about unemployment. Some of you may be applying for unemployment for the first time. This might not be something that you have been have experience with, because generally unemployment hasn't extended to self-employed individuals. Unemployment is governed at the state level, and the general requirements tend to be that there is a 1-week waiting period. Those receiving unemployment must be actively looking for work, and the benefits can extend for 26 weeks. All of these things have changed thanks to the CARES Act. Unemployment benefits are set at the state level, and they vary by state, but generally they replace between about 50 and up to about 60% of your earnings before you became unemployed. And this amount is calculated based on what they call base earnings, that generally looks at the amount you earned in the year before you became unemployed. Some states look at it on a quarterly basis, some look at a full year, but in general, it's a percentage of what you would earn under normal circumstances. And we know in the arts, there is very rarely normal. I also want to make sure you're aware that unemployment benefits you receive do count as taxable income to you. So file that away. At the end of the year, if you receive more than $600, you'll receive a 1099-G from your state that will report your unemployment benefits as taxable earnings. Now, what's special about this moment we're in right now is that the CARES Act that was signed into law introduced 3 new programs that basically expand unemployment benefits. So these were introduced at the federal level, and then states received guidance, and they are still receiving guidance about how to implement these programs. The first one that you're probably most familiar with is the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. We're calling this PUA, and this basically expands the number of individuals that are eligible to claim unemployment. This is why those who are self-employed can now file for unemployment. The next aspect of the program, or the next program, is that special piece that adds $600 per week on top of the unemployment benefits that states would normally pay out to eligible individuals. So that's a second piece. Most states are incorporating this automatically into their unemployment process, which is good. But then the third piece expands the period of unemployment from 26 weeks to 39 weeks. So it basically adds a 13-week period to the unemployment benefits. So to distill all this down, unemployment now covers more people, it gives people more money, and it lasts longer. So that's really good. We have a question in the chat. What if your 2019 Schedule C, which your unemployment benefits may be based on, shows a loss that is no income? That's a great question. A couple of states have answered that question specifically, and in general, in those states, they are paying out the minimum weekly amount for unemployment, even if self-employed individuals showed a loss from the previous year. Now, those states might ask you to provide copies of invoices you sent out, or maybe a bank statement, just to substantiate your business activities a little bit more. But in the states who have specifically addressed this question, they have said, even if you have a loss, that's okay. We will pay you the minimum unemployment benefit amount. And that amount varies. I think the lowest amount, I think, is $33 a week, but many states that goes up to, $100 or more as the minimum amount per week. So great question, Greg. Thanks for that. In addition to all of these expansions, I do want you to remember that unemployment is still administered by states and territories, which means even though we have this extra stuff going on at the federal level, the states are still incorporating this and administering it, right? So definitely keep that in mind. You're going to want to get to know your own state's unemployment office really, really well. The changes that have come now, in addition to the introduction of those 3 new programs, is that in general, the waiting period has mostly been waived. Now, the CARES Act enabled states to waive that waiting period, and most states have taken the step to waive that waiting period. That means if you become unemployed on a particular day, you are eligible for unemployment benefits the day afterwards. You don't have to wait an entire week before you're eligible. Also, the requirement to be actively looking for work has mostly been suspended. One state did call out and note that you still have to answer yes to the question that you are actively looking for work, just based on how their system is designed, but most states have waived this requirement, given that we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Most states have also automatically extended benefits to 39 weeks instead of 26 weeks. Although for some individuals, if you had previously started claiming unemployment and then maybe fell out of the system, or you wanted to rejoin, or maybe your benefits ran out after 26 weeks, you would be someone who would want to reapply now that there's a new 13-week window that you would be eligible for. Again, that extra $600 is mostly being included automatically in those weekly payments that are going out and will start going out, in particular over the next couple of weeks. So that's good. But most states, I think all of them in this region in particular, do require that you certify your eligibility for unemployment each week. You have to certify that you are still unemployed on a regular basis. And so many states allow you to do that by logging into your account on their website, or there's often a phone number you can call to certify that you are still unemployed. And this actually connects to a question in the chat from Kate. And Julie, I see your question, and I promise I'll come back to it. But Kate asks, what if you're still making a little money as someone who is self-employed, but it's either not enough to live on, or it's substantially less than you had been earning previously? The good news is, in the states that apply to this particular region, you can still make a little bit of money and still be eligible for unemployment benefits, which is wonderful. When you go through that recertification process each week, you would want to report whatever earnings you had during that week. Maybe you are earning a little bit because you're a musician and you're teaching music students online, or maybe you're an artist and you sold one work to a longtime collector. You would want to report those amounts each week. And as long as they're below the minimum amount, you should still get whatever you are eligible for. If the amount you earned is more than the minimum amount, your benefits might be reduced a little bit. Or if a week is particularly good for you, you might not qualify for unemployment that particular week, but that's okay, right? That's just that 1 week. Then you can get back in the following week if you don't have additional sales. Another question sort of related to this came up when it comes to maybe a grant you received, or maybe you did work for someone way back in February, but they're only paying you for it now. One of the questions that came up in an email ahead of time was, will that affect my eligibility for unemployment? And the answer is, it depends on the state. Some states look to the cash you get during a week, right? In which case receiving the cash would make a difference. Most states, however, look at when you earned the money. So if you earned it during the week by selling a work or doing some online teaching or actually earning the grant in that particular week, right, then it would count and you would want to report it. But if it is something that you earned quite a bit ago, in the states that aren't looking at cash, they're just looking at when you earned things, that wouldn't affect. A clarification question from Kate in the chat. You would report net earnings, not gross earnings. That's a great question. Again, it depends on the state. When it comes to thinking about what you're eligible for, right, we would want to look at gross earnings, right, as opposed to net earnings, but different programs calculate things differently. So definitely, as you're thinking about, let's say in my example, you're a visual artist and you sold a work for $100, but the cost to produce the work was $50, you would only report $50 of net income as you're reporting during the week. So I hope that helps answer your questions, Kate. Thank you. Heidi has a question as well. What about grants? And you know, it depends on the grant, right? And it depends on what the state says. If they are looking at money you're earning right now, and you receive a grant, that would count probably against your eligibility for unemployment in that particular week. But let's pretend you were awarded a grant way back in January and you're just getting some of the payment for that grant right now. If you're in a state where they're looking at earnings rather than cash flow, you'll probably still be okay. As you're thinking about this, you're asking all the right questions, right? And that's generally what happens in the arts. The arts are full of amazing humans who think through things really analytically and critically and ask the right questions. Thank you for those. And also know some of them are being answered, but in some cases, you're the first person to ask some of these questions. So be patient with your state unemployment officers and the other individuals that are navigating these programs, because they are also working remotely and juggling a whole lot of life circumstances right now. But the key questions that tended to come up are, how are you calculating base earnings, right? And how does that translate into a weekly amount? How do you prove your base earnings if you're self-employed? And again, some states have confirmed they want to see your tax return from last year. Schedule C for many individuals is the form we'd be looking at. That's where you report your income and ordinary and necessary business expenses from your business, if you're a sole proprietor or a single member LLC. Other states are saying it's okay to provide bank statements or copies of invoices or other information you have to provide. And one state is saying they don't even want to see any documentation yet. They just want you to certify that you did the calculation correctly, and they'll sort out all the details on the back end. So keep paying attention, we'll keep staying tuned, and we will go through these nuances on a state and territory basis in a moment. The question we already touched on, because it came up in the chat, was, can you still be partially employed? Answer is generally yes. And then there's an important question about how should you answer some of these questions that weren't really designed for you, right? And that's something many states are struggling with as well. And we'll see in a moment when we go into the details. Some states are saying, you know what, do your best, we'll figure it out. Other states are saying, you know what, hold on, we're redesigning this system so it does apply to you, and then you'll be able to apply for it. Maryland is an example of one of those states. Their specific application for pandemic unemployment assistance, so unemployment for self-employed individuals, that opens up on Friday. So they've said, wait, hang on, these questions weren't designed for you, we'll redesign them for you, and then we can get ready. So let's start state and territory talking in detail, right? I'm going to go in alphabetical order. So if you live in the District of Columbia, this is the link to your website where you will want to get to know everything really, really well. And what's interesting about DC is that if you are someone who is self-employed, the system for self-employment isn't ready for you yet. The website is encouraging you to email pua@dc.gov, and then you can stay tuned for updates. I'd check in with it every couple days or so instead of relying on a notification, but they have not yet incorporated self-employment, unemployment into their system. In general, though, your benefits will be based on your income over the past 18 months, and you will need some sort of wage verification information, but there's no guidance in DC on what that is. My suggestion would be get your tax forms ready, plus maybe some bank statements or whatever else you have that you think might be helpful, because that's going to be what you're going to want to submit at some point when it's ready. In DC, like in most places, you do not have to be actively seeking employment to still be eligible, although the question is still on the form, right? So kind of be aware of that. The waiting period has been suspended, and that additional $600 is going to automatically be included in those weekly payments. If you're in Delaware, here's what your website looks like. And again, just to remind you, you will be getting a copy of all of these slides afterwards. I am going through this kind of quickly, and this is a lot of information. So take a breath. I promise you will have access to all of this information, and it'll be okay. So for Delaware, Delaware has suggested that you don't call Delaware. They would like you to email them. And if you are going to email them, go ahead and have your confirmation handy, because that's going to help. But that assumes that you are already in the system, right? Maybe you had a W-2 job, or you were a traditional employee and you were laid off and you're applying for unemployment now. Because in Delaware, much like DC, unemployment for self-employed individuals isn't incorporated quite yet, but they are working at it. Delaware has shared that if you would like updates on frequently asked questions or the system in general, they are encouraging you to text UIFAX to 555-888. Delaware has also said that you need to have a couple of things ready. You want to have your driver's license ready, last year's tax form ready, and some of these other, your Delaware business license number. You want to have that information handy so that when you are ready to apply and when the system is ready for you to apply, you are ready to jump right in there. The maximum weekly amount in Delaware is $400, and again, it's based on your previous earnings. Much like many other areas, Delaware has suspended the requirement to be actively looking for work. And what's really nice about Delaware is they called out in particular that if you do not have access to the internet or you aren't able to fill out these forms online, there are secure drop boxes outside of each of their locations, and you can also mail in your application. So Delaware is trying very hard to make sure there are accessible ways for all individuals to apply for unemployment. For those of you in Maryland, your Department of Labor's website is here. And as with all states, they are doing a really wonderful job sharing information. In Maryland, as in other areas, there is no waiting period. So your eligibility begins the day after you became fully or partially unemployed. And you also don't have to be actively looking for work. What's interesting about Maryland is that they are encouraging you to file online through net claims. You have to file for 1 week at a time, and they're trying to control the flow of activity on their website so that if your last name begins with the letter A through F, they want you filing on Mondays. If you're sort of in the middle of the alphabet with your last name, they want you filing on Tuesdays. And then if you're in the end of the alphabet, they want you filing on Wednesdays. This doesn't affect when you get your benefits because they are retroactive to the day after you became fully or partially unemployed, but that's helping with the traffic on their website. As you know, many of these sites have been overwhelmed with traffic. So this is one way Maryland is trying to kind of control that flow a little bit. If you miss these days, don't worry. Anyone can use the website on Thursday or Friday. And as I mentioned, Maryland's system for those who are self-employed, their application process is going to open up on Friday. That's a couple days from now, the 24th. I would plan for the website to be very overwhelmed on Friday because everyone can use it on Fridays, and this is the first day it's opened. So you might want to plan to try to apply during a non-peak time. So maybe that's really, really early in the morning for you or something like that. Or just plan to be really patient because the benefits will be retroactive to the day you became eligible, right? So it's not like you have to sort of jump in line to get them immediately. Be patient, take your time, take a breath, and then go ahead and file on Friday-ish when things open up. Unemployment is ranging in Maryland from $50 to $430 per week. And again, it's based on your base earnings. So in Maryland, they're looking at, careful for this language, the first 4 of the last 5 calendar quarters. So what does that even mean? If you're applying right now, they're looking at January through December of 2019. Those are the first 4 of the last 5 calendar quarters. And luckily that coincides with your Schedule C. So that's something you'll probably want to have handy and get ready to go. If you live in New Jersey, this is what your website looks like. And a quick note on New Jersey, when you go to the website, hang out for a second because there's a pop-up that comes up that directs you to pandemic unemployment assistance, right? And if you are someone who is self-employed, that's what you're going to be looking for. So go to the main website and then watch for that pop-up. I found that to be the easiest way to navigate to the information you need. Now, New Jersey is a little bit interesting because in New Jersey, you have to apply for regular unemployment first. They need you to have an account within their system. They are working to build out their special pandemic unemployment assistance system, right? And again, it will be retroactive. But it's going to take a minute. It's not quite ready yet, but they do need you to go ahead and file for unemployment, regular old unemployment first. And the website is here on the screen, myunemployment.nj.gov. The New Jersey benefit is 60% of your weekly wages, and then the minimum amount is $213. And New Jersey has provided a lot of frequently asked questions, clarification, and additional information. They have specifically said that even if you had a business that was operating at a loss for the last calendar year, so on your Schedule C that you'll be submitting, that is A-okay. You will get the minimum amount, which is $213 a week in New Jersey. And don't forget, you'll also get that extra $600 a week while that is in effect, and that will automatically be added to your weekly payment. New Jersey clarified as well that self-employed wages are calculated using last year's tax return. And New Jersey said, you know what, maybe go ahead and have 2 years of tax returns ready to go, which is not a bad suggestion. Someone asked in the chat earlier, what if you haven't filed your 2019 tax return yet? Which is a great question. As we know, the IRS deadline to file taxes in 2019 has been extended until July. So there are a number of individuals that have not yet filed their taxes. That's okay. Depending on what state you live in, they will probably accept some kind of alternate determination of your income. So maybe that's your bank statement. Maybe you have a formal financial statement. So maybe it's a report generated from QuickBooks or FreshBooks or any other kind of system you use that might track your income and expenses for your business during the year. That would be a way to substantiate your income for the year. Or maybe for you, it is an Excel document, which is perfectly fine, and some copies of invoices or other external documentation that shows your income. As I mentioned, in New Jersey, the extra $600 will automatically be incorporated. And if you are someone who has already applied in New Jersey, if you have a confirmation number, be patient, right? They have said loud and clear that the system's really overloaded. If you were someone that applied and then got rejected, and so you don't have a confirmation number, but you think it was a mistake, New Jersey is suggesting that you go ahead and apply again, although I might say give it some time to see if additional guidance on New Jersey's pandemic unemployment assistance program comes out, because there might be easier workarounds once that guidance is released. New Jersey and New York have both shared documents they're calling application guides. And these documents are fantastic because they basically walk you through the entire application process with screenshots of what the application looks like. And then they've added commentary that says something like, you know, put your number from line 31 of your Schedule C right here. So that sort of guidance is incredibly helpful. So get your hands on that guidance if you live in New York or New Jersey. Again, it's called an application guide, and it's really, really helpful. What's also interesting about New Jersey's system is once you are in there and applying, you can't save the application and come back to it later. You have to start over from the beginning. So to the extent possible, skim through that application guide ahead of time and make sure you've got the stuff you need to fill out the application successfully so that you don't have to do it a second time. There's a question in the chat about receiving Social Security benefits and whether or not that affects unemployment insurance. In general, sort of a blanket general answer is no. That is treated like additional income you might have. And so you may still be eligible for unemployment insurance that goes above and beyond the benefits you are receiving. So I think that's probably a really good option. Another question in the chat from Christopher. Christopher is an adjunct professor in the arts, and you're stopping in May, and it's not likely there will be any summer classes. So can you apply for unemployment? Technically, no. Well, let me qualify that. Yes. But here's the thing, you would want, I imagine as an adjunct professor, you're also probably making work and selling work. And so you're probably going to be eligible for unemployment based on your self-employment income, I would imagine, rather than your W-2 adjunct professor work that is not necessarily guaranteed. But because of the expanded eligibility, you should be able to apply in your state. Which I hope is helpful. Wendy, great question in the chat. Wendy, you said you were rejected from unemployment because the base year they have for you begins in October of 2018 and in September of 2019. So that excludes the job that you had, more recently. And then, okay, you wanted to get an extension, yes, understand, and you want to appeal. Yes, I think appealing is a good idea for a couple of reasons. Because of sort of the rolling way they calculate the base year, if you were to apply, say now, your base year probably will be shifted by at least a quarter. So your base year would be 2019 instead of starting at the end of 2018. And then the other thing, even in your art business, if you make almost nothing because you were focused on teaching, which I fully appreciate. Even if your art business had a loss on your Schedule C in New Jersey specifically, you would still be eligible for that minimum weekly payment plus the extra $600. But here's the thing, you were rejected already. So I might wait on it a week or two in New Jersey just to see if additional guidance about their PUA program comes out soon. I might just, check in with the website, follow the magical little pop-up every couple days or so over the next week or two, just to kind of slow play it. If you are deemed eligible, which I imagine you would be under the rules New Jersey has stated, then that eligibility will be retroactive, right? So you're not going to be losing any money, but it is going to take longer for you to start getting your payments, which I know can be really stressful. But I would imagine, I would suggest pause maybe just for a second, see what the additional guidance is, and then reapply. And I'm sorry you're going through that. I know that's stressful. Okay, in New Jersey, like in other areas, you do have to certify your eligibility each week. And this is one of those interesting areas where New Jersey specifically said, you need to answer yes to the question, do I have to be actively looking for work? New Jersey says definitely say yes to that question. Again, because the way the system is designed, if you say no, you'll be kicked out. But of course, they've waived that requirement in New Jersey. So they suggested definitely answer yes to that question. If you live in New York, this is what your state's website looks like. And New York has added a helpful visual that sort of walks you through the different categories and what you may or may not be eligible for. A handful of states have created similar visuals. We'll see at least one more example in a couple minutes. Texas has included something like this as well. So I think the visual, at least for me, is very, very helpful. In New York, what you would want to do is file a new claim online. The website is my.ny.gov. If you have already filed a claim, you don't have to file a new one. Just make sure your information is up to date. And New York is also encouraging you to use their website on days that correspond with the first letter of your last name, just again to help with the overflow of users that are trying to access these services. Yes, you can start right now in New Jersey. If you were under the old unemployment system, they're encouraging you not to call them. They're saying just wait, the Department of Labor will reach out to you. And this is a change from the original guidance they had issued a week or two ago that said, hey, if you were under original unemployment, give us a call, we'll sort through the details. And then they may have been overwhelmed by the number of people calling. So the Department of Labor is working through that and reaching out to individuals. Your earnings under unemployment are based on the most you earned in a quarter from the base period. And then they divide that high earnings per quarter by 26. So the benefit in New York ranges from $104 to $504. So again, if you're applying right now in April, your base year would be January through December of 2019. You do have to recertify every week in New York, as in everywhere else, and you can get partial benefits if you earned less than the maximum amount during the week. So your $600 should also be automatically added. New York has also issued specific guidance for self-employed individuals. This is similar to that application guide that New Jersey has published. It includes screenshots of how you answer particular questions on the application, and it's a great resource. So for those of you in New York, make sure you get your hands on this particular publication. For those of you in Pennsylvania, this is what your website looks like. And Pennsylvania has also added a visual that's, again, similar to New York's and the visuals shared by other states. And it sort of walks you through, okay, how do you apply for these different things and what are you eligible for? Now, Pennsylvania is a little bit different because they say loud and clearly on the website, do not apply for regular unemployment if you are self-employed, right? If you are self-employed in Pennsylvania, they want you to apply only through the PUA unemployment option, not regular old unemployment, right? So definitely apply for PUA instead. You may have been rejected already if you had already started an application for unemployment. So they want you to apply for PUA. You can start right now, and their payout is about 50% of your weekly earnings. And in Pennsylvania, they were very clear about saying you can certify or prove your self-employment unemployment using invoices, bank statements. If you have a tax return, so a Schedule C, that's great. Maybe you received 1099s from various groups that paid you last year, or maybe you had contracts or other sort of documentation to support your self-employment. Definitely pay attention to that because Pennsylvania is being very open about the type of documentation they're accepting. You do not have to be actively looking for work, and there is no waiting period, right? And in Pennsylvania, as in other states, if your unemployment is partial, you may still qualify. But again, we want to make sure that if you were separated from a W-2 job, you're going through the regular unemployment office in Pennsylvania. If you were self-employed, you want to only go through the PUA website in Pennsylvania. There's a question in the chat that's relevant. Julie says, would I be eligible for unemployment if my usual employment was only part-time? Definitely depends on the state, but in general, yes. In general, the expanded eligibility means that you can report part-time unemployment and still be eligible. The amount you would get would be lower, but you are still eligible. Your PUA in Pennsylvania is backdated. It can go back as soon as or as far as January 27th. And in Pennsylvania, you usually get your debit card with the money within 2 to 4 weeks. Some states use debit cards, others use direct deposits into your bank account. So again, have the information ready so that you can fill out what you need to fill out. If you are someone who lives in the U.S. Virgin Islands, this is what your website looks like. They are encouraging you to file online through the unemployment insurance portal. It's www.vidol.gov/apply for UI. It's a pretty easy system to navigate. You do not have to be actively looking for work, and you don't have to wait a week to be eligible either. The weekly minimum is $33 per week in the Virgin Islands. What's interesting as well about the Virgin Islands is if you have had hours reduced or your earnings have gone down, but you're not totally unemployed, you, if you're self-employed, or your employer, if you work for someone else, can send a letter documenting that, and that would count as substantiation for the U.S. Virgin Islands. Your extra $600 will be automatically included, and you'll get your extra 13 weeks as well. If you live in Virginia, this is what your website looks like. And you may have started noticing that there are a lot of alerts popping up at the top of these websites. That's because all the states are really trying hard to make sure the information relevant to the pandemic uninsurance program is available to everyone. What you need to do in Virginia is apply for unemployment. You'll be rejected. And then you can apply for pandemic unemployment assistance. In Virginia, you have to go through both steps. And so you're probably seeing how each state is doing this differently, right? In Virginia, you do have to do both steps. Apply, prepare for rejection, get rejected, then apply for PUA. Virginia is not requiring additional documentation at this time, but that could change. And I imagine it's probably going to change as they require substantiation of the claims. So get ready to prepare a tax return or any of those other similar documents that you can share. In Virginia, the automatic payment of $600 will be added. And again, as in all other areas, you can be partially unemployed and still collecting benefits. If you live in West Virginia, this is what your website looks like. They have another helpful visual here explaining the benefits. And I want to draw your attention to the right side of this chart where it says apply for pandemic unemployment assistance. It says coming soon. The system is not yet ready in West Virginia, but that's okay. You know, it will be coming soon. So definitely appreciate your patience. In West Virginia, if you have regular unemployment, so you lost a W-2 job, for example, go ahead and apply for unemployment. If you are self-employed, the system is not ready for you yet, so be patient. West Virginia also noted that their site isn't really compatible with mobile phone technology. So if you have access to a computer, that's going to be your best bet. You do have to recertify every week in West Virginia, but there's no 1 week waiting period, and you don't have to be actively looking for work. Although in West Virginia, they did note you will be automatically enrolled in Workforce, which is the job seeking site in West Virginia. So you'll be automatically enrolled in that, but you do not have to be actively looking for work. So there was a lot we just went through there again, right? And I see a lot of questions coming through in the chat. We'll get to all of them, but I wanted to sort of bring us back and highlight a couple of sort of key commonalities. Some states and territories are combining PUA or unemployment for self-employed individuals with the regular unemployment system, right? Some states are keeping them totally separate and saying either don't apply for regular unemployment, apply for PUA only. And still other states are saying you have to apply for unemployment, then be rejected, then apply for PUA. So it's confusing, and it does vary depending on where you are eligible. So really get to know your own state, which connects to a question that was submitted ahead of time. An individual said, I've earned money in a lot of different states. Where should I be applying? And the example they shared is that they live in Maryland and they're based in Maryland, and they earned money in Maryland from self-employment, but they also earned money in a number of other states as well. In this particular person's case, you'll want to start by filing in what we consider your tax home. So that would be where you live and where you earn much of your money. It doesn't even have to be most of your money, but because you live in Maryland, I would start there. It is possible that Maryland will direct you to apply in another state, but definitely go ahead and start with your home state. Almost all of the states and territories have a handbook for unemployment. Sometimes they'll call it a candidate handbook or something like that, but it exists, and it generally talks about general unemployment provisions in that state. Go ahead and skim through that. Even though you are probably self-employed and you are qualifying under this separate program, a lot of the same general procedures will still apply, like what your base year might be or what the benefit payout will be. So go ahead and read through the candidate handbook in your particular state, because it will be really helpful. And almost all of the websites do have frequently asked questions, although I have found they are not always easy to find, but they are there and they do keep being updated regularly. So bookmark that page or revisit it a few times. And as I mentioned, New York and New Jersey have those application guides that are really, really fantastic. Okay, before we talk about the other emergency assistance, I want to go through some of the questions that have come through the chat. Meryl Ann says that you make art and teach classes and private students in your studio. Classes are not meeting, but some private students are still coming using social distancing, and you're keeping everyone safe, which I think is wonderful. Private students buy 3 coupons for upcoming classes, and you get the money before you earn it. You also just got an advance for illustrating a book. Congratulations. But the work will happen over the next year. How do you claim that as income? Oh, what wonderful questions. My guess is the $2,000 advance and sort of prepaying of the students will count in the week you receive it. So as you recertify for your PUA every week, the state will ask what your gross earnings were that week. So go ahead and report that. Although depending on your state, you might want to drill down just to see if they've answered questions about whether or not they're looking at cash flow or earnings. I think it's pretty clear that the advance for the illustration work you would report in the week you get it. Prepaying students, you maybe could spread out over multiple weeks, but ultimately it may not make that much of a huge difference for you. Let's see, would the adjunct professor apply for independent unemployment or regular unemployment? Great question, Christopher. If you're an adjunct and let's say you had a contract and your school has said, nope, never mind, we don't need you, then you would apply for regular unemployment. In my experience as an adjunct, though, that's not usually how it works. So I think independent artist PUA unemployment is going to be the best bet there, I think. Sharon has a question. You're a working artist and instructor. Oh, and you've got 3 different jurisdictions, Maryland, DC, and Virginia. 2 are as independent contractors, and 1 you're an employee, which just started in the fall, so not too many hours. Do you have to apply in each jurisdiction? Great question. Let's see. I would say apply in the place where you live first, because my guess is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my guess is your business is located in the place you live, even if you may have gotten 1099s from other places. So I would apply in the place you live first. But it's very possible that that place will say, nope, you need to go apply in that different state. And then you can follow those directions as well. Let's see, this person lives in Maryland and has a seasonal job in DC, and you're receiving unemployment insurance from DC. Are you eligible for Maryland unemployment? If you had different income in Maryland, then you would be eligible. So let's think about this. You can't use the same dollars of income in your base year to apply for unemployment in different jurisdictions, right? But let's say you're getting unemployment from DC and that calculation is only based on the income you earned in DC. In that case, if you had other income from different sources, you could apply for unemployment using that other income, but you can't double dip in the other jurisdictions, if that makes sense. Question in the chat about applying for artist grants, but you haven't heard yet. Do you report that as income if you get some? Yes, especially if it comes in right now, which I think is wonderful. Okay, there are probably some more questions I haven't gotten to. I will follow up with you via email if I wasn't able to answer your questions, but I do want to touch on a couple of other key things, and then we'll return to questions at the end if there's additional time. So what about this other stuff beyond unemployment? Many of you may have started receiving your stimulus checks from the IRS. This is a tax credit from next year that you're getting early. It is not an advance on your refund or anything like that. So you don't have to worry about paying this back or anything like that. It's an advanced tax credit. And as we know, it's $1,200 per person and $500 per child under 16 years of age. If you have gotten your check or your direct deposit, congratulations. If you haven't, the IRS set up a portal where you can check the status of your stimulus payment. And they've also shared some really wonderful guidance about if you log in and you check your status and your status is not available, what does that mean? It could mean that the IRS needs some extra information from you. It could also mean that you're not eligible, perhaps because you earned too much money. So if you're still waiting on that stimulus money, go ahead and check the status. I have found that to be a pretty helpful resource for a lot of people. And individuals have already started getting their checks, so we know that money is moving. We also know money is moving through the PPP program. This is that Paycheck Protection Program. And we also know that many small businesses applied and the funding was fully spent as of last Thursday, I believe. But there was activity in the Senate yesterday to pass a reappropriation to add another substantial amount of money to this pool. So the PPP program basically works and does apply to you as a small business owner. You are self-employed artist, small business owner, right? So you are eligible for this program. And the way it works is you apply and you can borrow, and I'm air quoting the words borrow, but you can borrow up to 2.5 times your average payroll amount. Lots of terms of art in there. And then if you use the money you receive to pay your payroll, right, which can include you if you are self-employed, even though normally you're never paying yourself a salary, right? But for PPP purposes, it can include payroll to yourself. And it can include rent payments on a studio space you might rent and utilities. The whole purpose of this program is to keep people employed by their businesses and to keep their businesses operating, minimal rent and utilities for an 8-week period while we're sort of getting through this, right? So this is something that you may be eligible for. And so if you think it might be something you're eligible for, go ahead and get your paperwork ready, because if additional funds are approved, you're going to want to be ready to apply for those funds pretty quickly. What you'll want to do is find an eligible SBA lender. This is a program that's running through the Small Business Administration, the SBA. So find an eligible lender in your area. This may be your own bank or credit union, or it could be a different bank or credit union or partner in the community. PayPal recently announced that they were participating as an eligible lender for this PPP program, right? So it doesn't have to be a bank. In my experience, the smaller regional banks and the credit unions were able to respond a bit more nimbly than some of the larger banks to this program. So definitely be in touch with your own financial institution and maybe check out who the eligible lenders are in your area to see if that might be a good fit for you. This is what the application looks like, or the top of the application looks like for this PPP program. There are instructions as part of the application, so skim through them. But what I want to draw your attention to is this average monthly payroll amount. The SBA issued guidance last week that said, if you are self-employed, we know you don't have a payroll, right? That's not how self-employment works, right? But if you are self-employed, they want you to look at Schedule C, line 31. That is your net income amount from 2019. So income minus ordinary and necessary business expenses. And take that number, divide it by 12, and that will be your average monthly payroll. So then that's the amount that you could repay yourself over this 2-month period to have the loan be forgiven. And then if you had additional rent or utility payments, you could borrow up to 2.5 times that average monthly payroll amount. So this is a sort of tough, confusing process, but the SBA has wonderful guidance. I mentioned the interim final rule that they published last Tuesday, and also they have wonderful frequently asked questions on their website. So this is available funds up to 2.5 times your average monthly payroll amount, which we calculate based on Schedule C. And even though it's a loan, it is forgivable, meaning you do not have to pay it back if you spend at least 75% of the money on your average monthly payroll over a 2-month period, and then the remainder on rent and utilities, right? So this could be a good option if additional funds are appropriated. Now, here's the kicker. Part of this PPP program is that you will maintain your employment, right? So if you are paying yourself from PPP dollars, you cannot apply for unemployment during that same week. But let's say you're applying for unemployment right now, or starting Friday if you live in Maryland, and you have unemployment for, say, 2 weeks, and then you receive word that your PPP application has been approved. Then you'll have PPP money for an 8-week period. And then if that extends and then you need to jump back into the unemployment system, that would be okay. You can't do these two things at the same time, but you can do either one on a week-by-week basis. I mentioned that PayPal had sort of joined and became an eligible small business lender for purposes of PPP. I think it's worth remembering that you are part of a community as part of this. You live in cities and states and in districts and areas that value what you do. So don't forget that you are part of that community. And you serve individuals that value what you do, your customers and clients, the community foundations in your area. And again, those neighborhoods where you live and work and support your friends and family as neighbors, right? You are part of this community. And so it's okay to lean on these community members and ask for help right now. And also remember that your community extends to the financial institutions you work with. It extends to your bank and your credit union. It extends to other companies you work with, maybe your social media accounts. Facebook has announced a grant program, QuickBooks, Square, these different vendors that you work with. Definitely know that they are part of your community, and many of them are offering small business support, as are your state and local government groups, the unemployment offices in your states, and your small business administration. So with that, what should you really be doing right now? Definitely remember that you are not alone. You are part of this community. Spend a lot of time getting to know and love your own state's unemployment office and website, and explore those other options for support. If PPP is an option for you, that's fantastic. If you want to spend some time on the Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation website, exploring those COVID resources, that's a really good thing to do. And also, as you're thinking about this, do the math for different scenarios of what the rest of the year might look like for you. Most of the individuals and organizations I'm working with are planning for a best case scenario, a worst case scenario, and something in the middle. So go ahead and do the math and see what this might look like for you as well. And then take a deep breath, because it is going to be okay. We spent a lot of time going through unemployment assistance and highlighting some of these other opportunities, and then touching on the next steps. Thank you for your presence and your questions. I have that we are right at 4 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and conclude the webinar formally, but I do know there are some questions in the chat that I wasn't able to respond to, so I will respond to you via email afterwards. And as a reminder, you will be getting a recording of the webinar and a copy of these materials, so that you can review them at your leisure. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all of what you do to make the world a better place, and good luck. I'll see you again soon.